The Five Nights at Freddy's movie is coming out this year on October 27th, and I'm just as hype as anybody else. But the more details that eke out about this project, the more I've been thinking about it. If they set it in the right time period, this movie has the potential to settle a lot of debates about the early FNAF games in the timeline. But will it? Or will the movie be another one of Scott's official FNAF fan fictions? Well, that's what we're here today to find out. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. First, let's gather our ingredients. What all do we know about this movie? Well, for those who don't want to be spoiled, I'll start with just the officially announced parts about the movie and official cast listings. That being said, eventually we are going to talk about some leaks that may or may not potentially spoil parts of the movie. But before I talk about the leaks, I'll put a subtle message on screen so you know that we'll transition. Something like this. And for other things that aren't necessarily leaks, but rather IMDb listings or other not officially announced but not leaked material, I'll put this subtle information on screen. All right, that settled? Cool. The earliest solid information we ever got about the movie was way back when it was in the middle of its 8-year production hell, about 2 years ago at this point. Scott posted to Reddit to share the good news that they finally settled on a screenplay for the movie. The code name for it was Mike, and according to Scott, it was a good mix of all of the elements they liked from the previous screenplays with no major issues. That's good and all, but it doesn't tell us a whole lot. Frankly, it more so told us what the movie isn't going to be. But for now, that Reddit post has two main takeaways for us. He didn't like it when screenplays didn't have the protagonist of the movie have any sort of connection to Freddy's, so he wants the protagonist to have a connection to Freddy's. And he couldn't find a good way to make a Silver Eyes movie, so he stated he wanted to make the movie based off the games, not the books. So we'll use that to color our interpretations as we move along. What about other officially announced information? Well, casting is a huge one. I won't go into the IMDb listings yet, as some of them feel a little spoilery, but Blumhouse themselves actually announced several casting decisions during Dalco's St. Jude charity livestream as a reward. Specifically, Matthew Lillard as William Afton, Josh Hutcherson as Mike Schmidt, Piper Rubio as Abby, and Mary Stuart Masterson as an unnamed female villain. Mary sticks out to me immediately. I have so much cat fur on me. Mary sticks out to me immediately, mainly because I don't think she's literally being casted as unnamed female villain. Rather, whatever her name is would be a massive spoiler, so Blumhouse is holding on to that one. So another important point here is that there's an older woman villain within the plot, whoever that may be. And the last bit of officially announced information we have are Blumhouse teasing the animatronic designs in two different instances. The first was a while ago when they announced they're partnering with Jim Henson's Creature Shop for the animatronic designs. One, that's awesome. Jim Henson was a master at his work and is responsible for like 80% of what I watched as a kid, and did amazing things with puppets and suits, and his Creature Shop carries on his legacy. But second, look, it's Freddy and he's probably gonna get worn. Now, to be fair, we're not sure if this is hinting at a Springlock suit or rather just the way they're going to make the animatronics move while filming. There's no way to know that. Regardless, this was cool. But then, a few weeks ago when Blumhouse announced the release date of the movie, they also gave us this teaser image for it, with an official shot of the front of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, the back of a Freddy animatronic, presumably holding the hand of Abby. There's so much to unpack here, but for now, let's put it aside. No end in sight, but it's getting warmer? I did go down a level with the ramp, but I didn't think it would get this much hotter, but I wish I wasn't wearing pajamas. I wish I had something else to wear, frankly. Huh. These sometimes work like wish fulfillment. Today's video is sponsored by Rye Toast? Huh. Well, it's not bad. You asked and we listened. The first merch we ever did was that apron that's still ongoing and still available in my wife's Etsy shop, but we heard a lot of you saying that while you like the design or you wanted to support us, you don't need an apron. So we took that design and we put it on a shirt, and I think it looks pretty nice. If you want one, you'll have to go to my wife's Etsy shop and specify what size and order it. Now, because we still are making these ourselves, it's a little finicky. Essentially, every month we'll total up the orders that we got, purchase the shirts we need to make at the end of the month, and start shipping them out around the beginning of the next next month. So this is only going to be available for the next couple weeks in April, and we're basically doing a test run to see if we can manage to do this ourselves. Now, if there's way too many orders for us to handle for April, we'll still manage, and maybe we'll just change how we do things moving forward. But for now, if you order one before the end of April, we'll make them and ship them out at the beginning of May. And I just want to thank you guys oh so much for all the amazing support that you guys have shown this channel, and the fact that I even have to worry about too many orders is a blessing. Thank you again. Oh, this is a lot more comfortable to be in. Well, at least it's cooler, because man, those pajamas were getting warm. Oh, onward and upward. Now we're moving on to IMDb and resume listings that have not been formally announced by Blumhouse. Moreover, just casually updated online. So, all the named character castings that we have that aren't officially announced by Blumhouse are Elizabeth Lail as Vanessa, Kat Sterling as Max, Christian Stokes as Hank, Joseph Poliquin as Carl, Ryan Reinecke as Freddy's security guard, Jofiel Love as Ghost Kid number 5, Bailey Winston as Kim, Lucas Grant as Garrett, Victoria Patunad as Social Worker, and David Doty as Ghost Kid 3. There are some new names here that kind of feel like side characters inherently. Specifically, the names Max, Hank, Carl, Garrett, Kim, and Social Worker all kind of give me that vibe. I will say though, I've seen some rumors and speculation about the character Hank, specifically referring to him as Uncle Hank, which has led to some speculation that Hank could be the movie's equivalent for Henry. That feels wild though. What do you think? Tell me in the comments. However, the other listed characters are of interest immediately to me. Freddy's security guard feels like the official name for who has been henceforth referred to as Phone Guy. After all, if this movie is going to retell the story of Mike Schmidt in a FNAF 1 location, we need a phone guy, and Freddy's security guard fits that bill. Ghost Kids number 3 and 5 are also notable, as if there's 5 Ghost Kids, that seems to imply Golden Freddy will definitely make some sort of an appearance. Finally, and most notably, and confusingly, Vanessa is here. This throws a big wrench into everything timeline-wise. In Security Breach, Vanessa is in like her late 20s, early 30s, if I had to guess. So either this movie takes place way later in the timeline than we thought, and Mike is guarding some long-closed pizza place, or this Vanessa is different from the one we see in the games. Or, oh god, she's a robot and doesn't age. But we'll save that discussion for later in the video. I do remember seeing some other people claiming some other IMDb listings, but I don't see them on the official page and they feel pretty spoilery, so I'm saving them for the next section. You know, this one. There have actually been a good couple of leaks about this movie. Now, keep in mind, the inherent nature of a leak shows that it's not confirmed information. So anything in this section could potentially be fake, so take it with a grain of salt, and we'll try not to rely on any information we have in here, but rather use it as supporting evidence. The first leak I can recall, I actually wrote a whole script about way back in October, where we got a leak of the call sheet for auditions for Mike, Vanessa, and Abby, along with a very brief synopsis of what the movie is going to be about. That sheet was leaked before the Dawko livestream, so it does softly confirm the sheet to be true, since we still have Abby and now we have Vanessa. If so, it confirms that Abby is Mike's younger sister, and that Vanessa knows more about the Pizzaplex than she lets on. Later on, we got not necessarily a leak, but a spoilery casting call for auditions for extras, specifically a birthday party and a separate one for an 80s crime scene. This is huge because with William Afton being in the movie, an 80s crime scene, and a birthday party, this movie is in some way going to talk about the missing child incident. And either it's going to take place in the 1980s and show it to us, or at least have some sort of flashback or news coverage of the event. Speaking of William Afton, there's been one more huge leak that's very spoilery, so you can skip ahead to here because this feels like the biggest spoiler I'm talking about so far. Someone leaked a specific animatronic head supposedly from the Jim Henson Creature Shop, Springtrap. So either William has been spring-locked by the time we get to the movie and we encounter him, or he becomes spring-locked somewhere in the movie. That does somewhat rule out the movie taking place during the missing child incident though, because that would have had to happen before he becomes a zombie furry. Finally, there are some leaked casting calls that I cannot find anywhere on IMDb, and the only source I can find are official-looking resumes. A few of them are to no surprise, the main cast of animatronics. John Moore as Bonnie and Ted Atherton as Golden Freddy. These track, we knew these were probably going to be here, but there's much bigger spoilers in the next set of casting decisions. Jane Wheeler as the puppet, Dylan Horner as Balloon Boy, Mikey Madison as Toy Chica, and Jessica Blackmore as Mike's mom. This feels huge. Either FNAF 1 and 2 have closed down and all of this stuff was just pushed into one building that Mike is now guarding, or this movie actually takes place in the FNAF 2 location. Because although we're pretty sure the puppet was at some point at the FNAF 1 location, we have no indication that Toy Chica or Balloon Boy were ever there. Frankly, they should have been scrapped by the end of FNAF 2. And finally, although I don't see any plot relevance for it yet, we did get leaked footage of Josh Hutcherson beating the ever-loving shit out of a random dude in the mall as Mike Schmidt. So, that's pretty cool. Alright, all that being collected, let's mix our ingredients and see what kind of theories start to form. And in case you got here by skipping the spoiler parts to avoid spoilers, I'm gonna be talking about them and taking them into account in the discussion, so we're pretty much in spoiler territory for the rest of the video. But, I mean, spoilers aren't a huge... Listen, I don't get the whole obsession with avoiding spoilers. I get wanting to be surprised, but to me, personally, as someone who studied literature in college, spoilers don't necessarily ruin something for me, it just lets me keep an eye out for foreshadowing for something I know is going to happen. But I totally get it, I just don't personally get it. Anyway, on to theory crafting. Alright, straight away, I think Mike Schmidt is going to be Michael Afton. Michael. In the games, we have reason to believe that Mike Schmidt in FNAF 1 is Michael Afton, and Scott specifically said in the Reddit post that he didn't like it when the protagonist wasn't in some way related to Freddy's. This would be a very strong relation, the son of the creator. That and Scott tends to like to have Michael Afton be a protagonist in some way. That being said, Abby makes me question that. The casting call we got back in October states that she's Mike's younger sister, and we don't have an Abby Afton. We have an Elizabeth, just not an Abby. And no, stop trying to make it work. Abby is short for Abigail. Abby isn't short for Elizabeth, that's not a thing. That all being said, even if we excuse the idea of an Abby Afton, something else further complicates this Afton family tree. Jessica Blackmore as Mike's mom. Specifically, we have a casting for Mike's mom, but Abby is stated to have grown up without her parents, and instead being raised by her, quote, unreliable brother, Michael. So does Mike's mom exist or not? Because if he's the brother of Abby and she grew up without parents, Mike's mom had to have been dead for about 10 years now, or at least some way out of the picture. This is all compounded by the fact with who William Afton is casted as, Matthew Lillard. A Matthew Lillard that is 15 years older than Jessica Blackmore, casted as Mike's mom. So if they really are married, that's a wild age gap. All that is to say that plus the 80s crime scene casting call is starting to lead me to believe that Jessica Blackmore plays Mike's mom during some sort of flashback or past activity. For whatever reason, death or otherwise, Mike's mom is no longer in the picture, but was at some point. That's why Mike has to take care of Abby. His mom isn't there anymore, and his dad is off killing children or something. We also know of a casting call for a news reporter in the 80s, which makes me think that the missing child incident is going to be portrayed via the news as a very big public event. People knew about this. The Aftons would have been a household name after a scandal like that. Wait, Afton would be a household name. Maybe that's why Michael changes it. Think about it, if something absolutely terrible happened, your father makes the worst decision possible and does something so heinous that the whole country is cursing his name, wouldn't you try to disassociate from that family? Try to reach for some semblance of a normal life? Part of that would be getting rid of your old names as smoothly as possible. Michael and Elizabeth Afton? The press knows those people, it's too public. They'd have to adapt. They'd become Michael and Abby Schmidt. Gee. I wonder where Scott and the team got the idea of relatives of the purple guy changing their name and location to avoid being associated with the tragedy. Anyway, that still begs the questions, why are they at Freddy's now? Why is Vanessa here? And stated as having a keen understanding of the dark history and inner workings of the restaurant, when does this game take place? And who is the unnamed female villain? I've seen some speculation that Masterson is playing the owner of the restaurant and is therefore being a villain in that way. But I see two main flaws in that argument. One, why in the world would the owner of the restaurant be a villain if it's not an Afton? And two, if she really just was the owner of that location, why would her name be a spoiler? They could just name her. Frankly, calling her a villain would be more of a spoiler than just naming her. Something about her name tells us something. But can we guess that name? Look to when she was announced. At the livestream, William, Mike, Abby, and the mystery woman were announced all together. One big, happy family. Blumhouse wasn't just announcing random characters to celebrate the livestream. Blumhouse was showing us the Afton family. But I already hear you. What about Jessica Blackmore's character, literally credited as Mike's mom? Well, think about the timing again. If this movie takes place after the missing child incident, we know that happened sometime in the early 80s. And if we're assuming that this is at least 10 years later because Abby never grew up with her parents and she's 10 in the movie, we'd have a Mrs. Afton in the early 80s and a Mrs. Afton sometime later in the 90s to 2000s. A younger Mrs. Afton in the flashbacks to the Fazbear tragedy, somewhere in her late 30s, and a slightly older Mrs. Afton in her mid-50s in the present day. Not only does this age line up timeline-wise, it lines up with Matthew Lillard. Lillard and Blackmore, like I said, are 15 years apart in age, but Lillard and Masterson, only 3. Guys, I think game theory was right. I think Mrs. Afton is entering the plot as an important character. Okay, hi, Editor Riley here. It's literally Thursday night at 1:30 a.m., I guess Friday morning. As I'm editing this, we got news that Wyatt Parker has been casted as young Mike. What can I say? I'm always right, but it seemed important, so I figured I'd add it. This all still begs the question though, what will we see in the movie? Sure, they could do a bunch of massive lore reveals, but would that be entertaining for a broader audience? Of course not. They would need to have whatever lore is necessary to serve the current story, the main movie and the action within it, and possibly hint to bigger pictures. Vanessa being here really confuses me. I feel like this movie takes place somewhere in the 1990s to 2000s era. That would place it firmly in FNAF 1 territory. So if Vanessa is the same one we know of in the games, by all means, she shouldn't have been born yet, let alone be old enough to be a police officer, as she's in her late 20s, early 30s in Security Breach, which is a game that takes place in the 2030s. And as convenient and helpful as a robotic person explanation is here, making it so she wouldn't age and could be in both a movie in the 90s and a game in the 2030s, stop for a second. Realize who we are, would that be satisfying for a general audience? Wouldn't that be too far? Seriously, ask yourself. If you're someone who's only ever heard of Five Nights at Freddy's in passing, and maybe you have a nephew that has, I don't know, Freddy Pelopet, and then you hear that a PG-13 movie is coming out and you take that nephew to go see it as a bonding experience, and you're decently enjoying it. It's got some decent horror, some fun scary moments, your nephew's enjoying it, but then during the third act, the police officer who's been assisting the main characters is revealed to secretly also be a robot and the long-lost sister of the main character. I would laugh and maybe walk out if I wasn't as deep in this franchise as I am. So we realistically have two options, and neither of them feel very good. Either Vanessa is a robot and we just have to pray to God that Blumhouse can pull that off, or it's a different Vanessa than the one we see in the games. Something Scott has done before in the books. At this point, it's hard to tell either way. Finally, I think I know why they go to Freddy's, but for that, I'd rather put it into my fully updated plot prediction. So we'll pop our mixture into the oven and see what kind of horrors rise. Oh, and spoiler alert for the movie, I'm always right, so this is definitely exactly what the movie is going to be. Mike and Abby Schmidt are the margins of the population, scraping by with what they have and each other's support. Abby is too young to remember what happened. She was just recently born in the 80s, but Mike remembers. More aptly, Michael remembers. His father, William Afton, had everything. A loving wife, a happy family, and a thriving business. His children, Michael, the oldest, his youngest son, and his daughter were happy. But Michael had a bit of a mean streak, picking on his younger brother. Eventually, the bullying went too far, and the youngest son's head was placed in the jaws of the Fredbear animatronic, which closed on him, killing him. William lost it. He began drinking, becoming more and more resentful at Michael. He knew he couldn't exact revenge on him the way he wanted to. He was his son after all. But that anger he felt towards Michael needed some kind of outlet. He needed someone else to punish. The other children at the restaurant. The ones who helped Michael or just stood by and watched it happen. William knew that they deserved punishment. William went and killed all 5 children involved in the incident, stuffing them into suits and hiding the evidence. The news picked up the story immediately. Fazbear's House of Frights. Children and owner William Afton go missing. Too soon after the death of their youngest child, the Aftons were thrown into a media circus. William was nowhere to be found and Mrs. Afton went off looking for him. All that was left was Michael and Elizabeth. He knew what he had to do. Michael took care of Elizabeth, going into hiding as Mike and Abby Schmidt, and just tried to scrape by. But Mike's guilt and resentment as towards what happened in his youth still haunt him to this day. Working at his most recent job, the worst case scenario happened. Someone recognized Mike, mentioning the incident. Mike lost his temper, beating the poor guy nearly to death in the middle of a mall. Obviously fired and charges were pressed. A social worker approaches Mike and Abby. She tells them that she can't keep bailing them out. Eventually, they're going to have to fix their situation. They need to get their act together, or Abby is going to be put in the system. This can't happen, Mike thinks. If the Afton orphan is put into the adoption system, no one is going to adopt her. There's too much baggage there. He needed a job. Desperate, he found one on a newspaper listing. The local closed-down Freddy Fazbear's Pizza needs somebody to watch over it at night to make sure hooligans and trespassers don't break in. Reluctantly, because of his past trauma, Michael takes the job. But before long, the ghosts of William's crimes make themselves known. But what about Springtrap and Mrs. Afton? And Vanessa? To be honest, I have no idea whatsoever. It could be a whole family mystery slowly coming out over the course of the movie, leading to this big springlock scene at the end. Or it could just be a background mystery setting up for possible sequels. After all, Matthew Lillard said he signed a 3-movie deal. Now, that's not to say 3 movies are confirmed. Don't get me wrong there. It's just a very common thing that if sequels are a potential down the road, production companies typically sign actors for multiple movies in the case they get renewed for those sequels. So it's something they have a possible intent for, it's just not confirmed yet. But that's the movies and the story that we might see in there. If you want to know more about the game's story and what's currently happening in them, check out last week's video about who the girl on the Ruin poster is. In the meantime, a huge shout out to the best patrons, the Toasted Slices, Emberisk, Charlie Bean, Lovey Puppy, Stormachow, Just BKZ, Chickpea, Lola Fembo, The Viper 26, Lehan, James Reiner, Emily De La Sierra, Snowblossom, Comrade Nika, Raven Eris, Glamrock Bonnie is an Agani, Bucky Ray, Mystic Angel, Supermoosh, Untrusted Life, Queen Coda, Dionysus, MD Switchy, Flip, Loose, Natsu Tanaka, Hyperdroid, Mini Metals, and Emmy Layton. And until next time, as always, stay toasty, Slices.